that they wanted to make an effort through the UN for the sake of international public opinion and probably United States public opinion. So they wanted 1441 and therefore wanted the return of weapons inspectors. But you can remember there was dissident voices. I think Vice President Cheney said publicly that he didn't want weapons inspectors. So there were different views in the administration, and you will know the US administration does have different views always, and it's usually quite a fractured system, and particularly so between the State Department and the Pentagon in the early stages of this crisis. So I think, well, certainly President Bush and our Prime Minister wanted 1441, wanted the weapons inspectors back in, but then I think in the US they were worried about getting entangled in the weapons inspection process and it taking longer than they would have liked, or maybe trapping them into that way forward. So, and there was some of this briefing against Blix, which again was in the media, and I see he's talked about publicly. So I think they wanted a try through the UN, but they didn't want to get entangled in the UN, and they wanted to be free to act, having tried the UN when they wanted to act.
So are you saying that there was a policy of only giving partial assistance to Mr. Blix and thereby ensuring that perhaps weapons of mass destruction were not found as rapidly as might be the case, assuming they're still there, in order to keep the military option open?
Well, my understanding is that, and I think this was, Blix asked for more help publicly, I think in one of his sessions at the Security Council. The UK determined to give him more help, and I think it's a matter of record, him saying that the US were less helpful. But it is a fractured administration. You can't assume coherence in that decision like a conspiracy to make Blix fail. You've got different parts of the US administration. Some of them never wanted to go back to the Security Council and never wanted Blix in anyway. So who was controlling the decision not to give him full help on the intelligence? I don't know.
You made the, to my mind, extraordinary statement that the Defence and Overseas Policy Subcommittee of the Cabinet never met on Iraq. Can I ask you, did you... Never met at all? No, that's exactly...
It's a long time since it hasn't.
That is exactly what Ms. Short said. Could I ask you, did you make a formal or informal request to the Prime Minister that that very, very important Cabinet subcommittee should meet?
No, I didn't. The way I pursued matters was both by bringing everything up in the Cabinet, reading all the intelligence, getting regular briefings from SIS, and seeing the Prime Minister quite frequently myself individually. I was working absolutely on the assumption that the UK would see its role as being to use our relationship with the US to try and keep the US with the UN and with the international community if we could possibly do it. And I operated in the way that I've described. I now think I was working on a false premise, but that's what I decided to do. But I was very conscious, but this is happening actually in our government system, that a breakdown of normal decision-making procedures and decision-making getting very individualised in number 10, that's happening in general.
You made two references to areas where you thought the intelligence picture was exaggerated, in the sense that the threat was exaggerated, and you referred to the issue of imminence, and you referred also to links with Al-Qaeda. Were there any other areas where you believe the intelligence position was exaggerated?
No, I think our intelligence service absolutely believed, as I do, that Saddam Hussein was going on with the science and going on with trying to get chemical and biological. They were absolutely clear that he was a long way from nuclear, that he didn't have any capacity and it would take years. You know, he had tried it before. So the conversations, their briefing, and the conversations with them were like that. But I think it's this phrase, weapons of mass destruction. When that's used, people think of bombs full of chemical and biological weapons that are going to rain out of the sky and drop on people or whatever. They don't think of scientists and laboratories and experiments. And I think that's where the falsity lies. Yes, he was dedicated to having scientists doing the work to try and create chemical and biological capacity. But the suggestion made to the public was that it was all weaponised and could be used imminently and was a dangerous threat to us and other neighbouring countries. I think talk of Cyprus being reachable and so on, there was.
So you're suggesting that it was the use of the intelligence material by members of the government, by politicians, that was responsible for the exaggeration?
That is my suggestion, yes.
Was there any complaint at the time that you met the JIC or the SAS people that their raw material was being misused by government?
They never said that to me, but they too, we discussed the desirability of the second resolution, which they thought highly desirable. I mean, my understanding of their judgment was that this should not be left, but that we should try and keep the world together. I mean, I have read the media, as have you, and my own reading is that, of analysis, is that when there was no WMD found, and then, because, you know, now so much information we get through off-the-record briefing to the press, so it started to be suggested maybe the intelligence was defective, that made the intelligence community so angry that they started to brief about the way in which their material had been exaggerated politically. I mean, that's my reading of what has taken place.
Thank you, Chairman. Claire, can I move on to the September dossier, which I think on the 3rd of September the Prime Minister announced would be published with the government's assessment of Iraq's weapons of mass destruction capabilities. Can I ask you whether you saw any related papers to that dossier before it was published in September?
Well, as I've said, I saw the raw intelligence as it comes in, which is telephone intercepts and reports of conversations with individuals, and it doesn't say who they are, but it says a reliable source or a news source or that kind of material all the time. No, and then the dossier, and I saw all the Joint Intelligence Committee reports, and then the dossier, which was threatened once and then held back, and then it came again. And I have to say, there were 3 dossiers, weren't they? And they were all pretty shoddy pieces of work. I mean, even the human rights one, and there's no doubt there's dreadful human rights abuse, was very old material, a lot of it preceding the first Gulf War. So I'm afraid I wasn't surprised that it wasn't a kind of forensic, highly accurate document, because I think that's the House style.
Do you recall how much of the information that was included in the September dossier came through shared intelligence arrangements with other countries? Were you ever told that?
No, but my understanding is we share with the US, but I've been informed that our intelligence was better, and I understand we share with France that was and they have good, and that was uninterrupted right through the crisis, funnily enough. That's my understanding. Or France shares with us.
That's interesting. I don't think I've heard that before, in fact. Can I just ask you whether you think that the September dossier was an accurate reflection of Iraq's threat at the time, or was it, how can I put this, exaggerated?
I haven't reread it, so now this is quite a long time, but my sense is that lots of it was accurate, and the exaggeration in the suggestion of immediate threat, and the suggestion, which I think isn't in the dossier, but was made in press briefings and maybe in the House, of a potential link to Al-Qaeda. That's where the falsity lay. And of course, when you see the picture of what happened, it's the exaggeration of immediacy means you can't do things properly, and action has to be urgent.
So you think there was a deliberate attempt to emphasise certain aspects of the intelligence to make the threat more credible and real and immediate?
To make it more immediate, more imminent, requiring urgent action, yes, that's what.
Did you try and oppose that in any way in Cabinet? Did you try and challenge it?
I think I was seen as pretty awkward throughout. I raised the question of Iraq repeatedly in the Cabinet and kept questioning. But you can't fire on all sides, on all issues, all the time. So the dossier, I was still dedicated to the second resolution as the way of restraint. Therefore, I didn't fight hard over the dossier.
Can't believe you would have been awkward. I can't believe you would have been awkward.
I wonder if we can just pursue this question of the dossier. What was as far as you're aware, the process by which that September dossier, the Weapons of Mass Destruction one, was produced? Did a draft come to the Cabinet? Were you involved? Were you asked for comments in the process of it being drafted, since you were seeing the JIC stuff?
No, a draft didn't come, and I didn't comment on a draft. again, speaking from memory, there was talk of a dossier earlier, the publication of intelligence material. Then I think that went quiet for a bit, and then it was brought back, and Alistair Campbell and co were involved, so I left it to them.
Well, I was going to ask
That's
you,
not my specialty.
because you
that
said
side
that
things.
when you said the Prime Minister's close entourage were involved in all of this, I assume that you were including the head of the Government Information Service in that category. What was...
Campbell individually, Jonathan Powell, Baroness Morgan, Sir David Manning, that close entourage.
Yeah. And what do you think was there, or what do you know of their involvement in producing this dossier? Do you think they were involved in that?
I don't know in any direct way, but that was the team. They were the ones who moved together all the time. They attended the daily, in inverted commas, war cabinet. That was the in-group. That was the group that was in charge of the policy.
Morgan, you mentioned somebody else.
Jonathan Powell.
Oh, yeah.
And Sir David Manning, of course.
Yeah. And you also said that in relation, actually, I think, to all of the dossiers, you thought they were a bit shoddy, the work. But then you said, well, didn't surprise you because this was kind of the house style, I think was your line.
Oh, that's harsh, isn't it? Well, I think I mean it. It's just that there's a difference between... I'm really shocked by the way these decisions were made. These decisions are of such profound importance for human life, for the record of our country. I think one has to go to a sort of higher level of commitment to truth and accuracy and proper decision-making. I mean, you should do it all the time, but particularly in a question like this, when you're going to war, when people will lose their lives, when the future of a country is at stake. And things were not decided properly. No records, no papers in the Prime Minister's study, all informal, this small in-group of people. And obviously Alistair Campbell is responsible for a presentation of government policy, and that soon becomes propaganda. And there's a place for that. Once proper decisions have been made, then the government should put forward what it's trying to do as well as it can and communicate to the public. But the two often conflate, and they were conflating there.
When one of the allegations about this document is that into the forward have been pulled, two or three of the bits that might scare people more than others, one of which, of course, was the 45-minute allegation. Are these the sort of things that you think that in a group or some of the members in it would have been
I don't know about the writing of the forward, but I mean, in every government publication that I've been involved in, and I've written a forward, I do my own forward. And that's the nature of... for ministers who take personal responsibility for what they do, you would expect that to be a very personal thing in a document of that kind of priority.
But you don't know how it happened with this document. Just a couple of minutes on this, the 45-minute allegation. In all the briefings that you had, the SIS briefings that you had and the JIC stuff that you saw, was that a feature of that?
No, never. And don't forget, because of my focus on, and I don't know what arrangements you made to see material, but I do hope you pressed to see this defence intelligence assessment, because of course they had to make an assessment about our troops, and that's relevant to Iraqi people's risk. So I was very, very fixated on what is the risk of the use of this material on unprotected Iraqi people. So I attended to all of that in some considerable detail, and I never, this 45-minute threat was not
a feature of the briefing, no. The person-to-person briefings to you, of this is something you really ought to worry about.
No, and it was that it's there's a risk, but the risk of use is probably not high, but a danger, was kind of the tone of...
And just, if I've got time for just one more thing. On the Defence and Overseas Policy Committee, did it, other than on Iraq, does it meet regularly? Does it, do you have...
No, it has met. I mean, at the beginning of in 97, my department wasn't a member of it, and we became a member of it, and there were some early meetings. I can remember Ministry of Defence, they always do those wonderful overhead projector, but they're terribly good at that. They like all that equipment. Type presentation, because we never had a presentation on military options or the military strategy. I did personally, but there was never a presentation of that either. It hasn't met for years, I think.
So on the big other issues you were involved in, big humanitarian efforts in Africa and places like that, you didn't DOP didn't meet and consider these issues?
No, I mean, but the others would have been Afghanistan.
Yeah.